ask you, what is the Green Party offering to Canadians that's different from other parties?
I mean, some facts, some data, more than slogans. Hopefully, we've got thousands of members throughout the country. We're passionate.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Radical Center podcast. This election is certainly off to an interesting start, to say the least. Like in the provincial election, we are reaching out to the main parties in the hopes that everyone listening gets a better chance to hear all different perspectives. And we may not always agree with a certain party, but we'll still always give them a voice here. As always, I'm joined with my co-host Noka, and today we're welcoming a very special guest. Jonathan Pedneault is the co-leader of the Green Party, and we're pleased to welcome him to the pod. Thanks for joining us, Jonathan.
I'm super excited to be here, and thank you for having me.
Well, we're certainly excited to have you. You are an activist, a journalist. You are the Green candidate in Outremont, which is actually the former riding of the former leader of the NDP, Tom Mulcair.
That's correct.
And you're now going up against Liberal Cabinet Minister Rachel Bendayan. In 2011, you were deployed to cover the Egyptian revolution. And I just learned this today, but you were detained by the Egyptian army. You've also covered the Libyan civil war. And you've also worked on documentaries for CBC and Radio Canada. Welcome to the show. And is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think the reason I'm standing in this election particularly is very much linked to my experience abroad as well. So look forward to discussing that with you guys.
For sure. Well, Jonathan, welcome to the Radical Center. I'm also very happy to have you here. You're fairly new in the leadership role, and Canadians are just starting to get to know you. And tell us a little bit more about Jonathan. How did you get into this? How did you become the leader of the Green Party? What drew you to the Green Party? What brought you here today?
Yeah, just a few days ago, the Beaverton was publishing this picture of all the leaders, and then there was a headline: "Who the hell is this guy?" talking about me. So that was kind of funny. But I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to share my story and also my ideas and the ideas of the party with more Canadians in the weeks to come. But generally, I mean, I'm the son of a single mom. I know a lot of politicians always start with that, but it's kind of relevant because, unlike, I guess, other more professional politicians, I am new to this sphere. Most of the time, for most of my life, I was on the other side of this, invisible line between journalism and politics, right? I was the one asking the questions, not so much responding to them. And I did that for quite a few years. When I was 15, I became very moved by the topic of genocide, which is not something that I experienced myself, of course, or anyone in my family experienced directly. But I was brought up with very strong values of wanting to give back to the community. My grandma was, dirt poor in many ways and struggling with mental health, and being a single mom in Quebec in the 60s. She was always giving back, being engaged in the unions, in church, in the Catholic Church, helping people who just got out of jail find jobs. And she was also a proud Quebec nationalist, which I'm not. She was very Parti Québécois, unlike me, and we had quite a few heated debates around the table growing up. But this sort of the value of giving back to the community was something that I was brought up with, and for me, that community extended not only to Quebec and Canada, but also to the rest of the world, and understanding that during my lifetime, when I was 4, a genocide had taken place in Rwanda. Decades after we had collectively committed to this never happening again, made me extremely mad. And I went on to give conferences in high schools, in my high school at first, and then was invited by other schools on the South Shore of Montreal, shore of Montreal. And eventually I reached out to a bunch of people, and one of them was Sacha Trudeau, the brother of Justin, with this crazy idea that I had as a 16-year-old of going into Chad at first to document the crisis that was happening in Darfur, in the Sudan, in the neighboring country. And, of course, I was too young at the time, but about a year and a half later, during my first year at university, Sasha reached out to me and said, "Oh, okay, well, let's try this." And so we went to CBC Radio Canada. We pitched the idea of traveling, the two of us, to the refugee camps, but also to Darfur itself with rebels. And somehow I managed to convince my mother that that was a good idea. And she reluctantly signed a few discharges and allowed me to travel just a few weeks before I turned 18 to document what was happening. And it was such an eye opener about, of course, the privilege of growing up Canadian, despite being the son of a single mom who was struggling economically. I didn't grow up in the best of circumstances, but I had a lot of love and a community around me. And being able as a teenager to travel to a foreign country to document a crisis there is something that I could do as a Canadian, but that a Chadian teenager or a Sudanese teenager would never have the luxury of doing. And beyond that, I got to, of course, see the whole, the structures of our world and the legacy of the living legacy of colonialism and how it impacts so many people around the world. And of course, the role of Canada in all of this as well. So it became very aware quickly on of our responsibilities in this changing world to really fight for justice, fight for human rights. And I continued on that tragic trajectory in Egypt, of course, and traveled to Somalia as well, in Yemen. And later on, I was hired by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, which is what I was doing in 2022 when the war in Ukraine broke out. And I'll always remember that day. I was in my bed in Bergen. I was living in Norway at the time, and it was, I think, 2 a.m. in the morning. And Putin went on the TV announcing his quote unquote special operation. And my colleagues immediately asked me to take my flak jackets and fly to Warsaw a few hours later to cross into Ukraine. And I was there for the first 10 days. And to me, that was such a radical shift in how international affairs had been conducted that I thought, well, this will become a very difficult time moving ahead for Canada as well. After 14 years abroad, now is the time for me to come back and get involved. And that's what I decided to do.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's such a great journey. Thank you for sharing that with us. I don't think a lot of Canadians know about your journey. Maybe we should call the Beaverton and let them know you a little bit better, and they can stop asking. Who is this guy? Tell us a little bit. So the Canadians don't really understand, or many Canadians don't really get the concept of a co-leader. How does that work with you and Elizabeth May?
Well, it's a bit like co-hosts, you you sit down, you discuss, you work collaboratively. I mean, that's the interesting thing, right? Like in so much of our lives, whether it's at work, in any relationships, in families, like we're always in relationship with people. But somehow in politics, there's this weird idea that everything needs to come from the top and sort of, that the one savior, the one strong man or woman is going to come and take all the decisions, save us. I just don't happen to believe in that. Neither does Elizabeth. And we think that Canada and democracy in general would function much better if we could actually sit down together, discuss, which is what, in some other countries we call parliament. Here, somehow it's turned into a bit more of a political theater. And that's something that my colleagues, Mike and Elizabeth and many other parliamentarians, it's not just, there are many good parliamentarians in Ottawa who are standing up for strong values, but try and resist the temptation and the pull of the theatricals that sadly our politics has turned into. And I think part of that is rooted in this very weird Americanization of our politics that, I'm going to vote for this guy as my prime minister. I'm standing to be the prime minister of this country. That's not how our electoral system works. And that's not how our constitution works. There's no mention of a prime minister in the Canadian constitution. It's something that we've inherited from the British system. It's a position, it's primus inter pares, not to flash out my Latin here, but it's, the first among equals technically. And somehow with history, and especially under Pierre Trudeau's father, office of the prime minister started to really take a lot of space and accumulate a lot of power at the expense of a strong cabinet. And I happen, and so does Elizabeth, to think that right now, especially in these times of crisis, what we need is not one strong prime minister who somehow has pretends to have the answers to everything, because nobody does. It's a strong team around the table that's committed to Canada. And that's why Elizabeth and I are happy to exemplify that and, open that conversation about collaboration as opposed to, the dictates from above that, we seem to be so used to.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's a new concept, and we look forward to seeing how it would unfold. Aside from the threat of Donald Trump, one of the biggest issues in this election is the economy. You recently announced a plan to make income up to $40,000 tax free. Tell us a little bit about that, and how's that resonating with Canadians? Do you think?
So we're proposing that anyone who earns less than 100,000
Mm-hmm.
see their basic personal amount expanded from 16,000 some $100. I'm just off a long flight to 40,000. So basically, when we work, the government only, as of now, the federal government only starts to tax you from 16,000, right? And now we're proposing that for anyone who earns under 100,000, that amount be expanded to 40,000. Why is that? And I was in St. John, New Brunswick, just a few weeks ago, and I met with this waiter who was all excited to tell me about his friend who's doing some pretty perilous construction work. Standing outside in the cold, in the dead of winter, it's cold, difficult working conditions. And he was like, yeah, but he's earning such good money. And I was like, oh, okay, tell me, how much, oh, he's earning $35,000. I was like, yeah, you know what? Like, $35,000 in this economy, it's not that much money. And yet, that's about the amount of money that my mom for most of her life has made. It's about the amount of money that most Canadians make. And when you look at the statistics, it's about 40% of the population that earns under $40,000, right? So a significant amount of us earn very little. And we don't think it's okay, especially in those circumstances that we're in right now, that the government would go and tax their last penny at a time when so many people are struggling to afford housing and food because of poor decisions by previous governments. But more than that, oftentimes I think because of our history with the liberals and the conservatives, when people say tax cuts, then we all start to think, okay, well, that's going to mean some service cuts in services because we have to be responsible and whatnot. And I absolutely agree with that. We need to be responsible and we need to go and get the money where it is. And the sad thing is that for many years, Canadians seem to think that, the biggest corporations in this country are having a hard time because they keep being told by politicians that, oh my God, we need to help these poor businesses that are struggling. Otherwise, they're going to leave the country and we will lose so many jobs. The fact is, Canada, Canadian controlled corporations, they are sitting on $17 trillion in assets, which is a significant amount of money. It's 17,000 many times over the state budget. And what we see is that over the past several years, their margins of profits have expanded, but they are not paying their workers more. So the average salaries are stagnating, but we see that people are making more and more money from investments, not from actual labor. And that is only, of course, applicable to a small portion of the population. That's problematic because at the end of the day, that means that a few people are starting to become extremely rich very quickly, while the rest of us lag behind. Now, what happens when people lag behind? You start to see homelessness. You start to see all these social issues. And who foots the bill for that? Government foots the bill for that. So if you look at the connection, basically we have these big corporations who aren't paying enough because they prefer to hoard money into their pockets. They're not paying people enough, and we end up footing the bill for these corporations' lack of solidarity with Canadians. That would be a tragedy if it stopped there. But what's actually happening is that government is subsidizing those companies, not only with tax cuts, but also with direct subsidies, up to several tens of billions, about $47 billion in tax subsidies last year. And when you look at the amount that the federal government raises from the whole Canadian population, it's 200 million. Corporations pay 90 billion. So less than half of what we collectively pay in income tax. So we're basically only suggesting that instead of the weight of taxation being carried by a majority of Canadians who are struggling right now, that it actually be complemented by corporations who start to finally pay their fair share and act responsibly.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, that's Thank you for that explanation. That sounds like great policy. Certainly resonates with a lot of people. It resonates with me. I want to ask you, what is the Green Party offering to Canadians that's different from other parties?
I mean, some facts, some data, more than slogans. Hopefully, every party and every institution has, we've got thousands of members throughout the country. We're passionate. A lot of people have put in years and years of volunteer work into building this party into what it currently is. But we're also a small party. And right now, we're faced with such an extreme situation, not only in terms of our own geopolitical positioning, the rising inequalities internally, and the climate emergency. The situation, the multiplicity of crises that we're faced with means that for us, this is really a time to tell it as it is and trust that Canadians are the intelligent people that we are. And sadly, a lot of Canadian politicians go the opposite way. It's the slogans and the simplifications and the appeals to emotion at a time when I think we can and must find out how we move forward as a nation in times of extremely difficult circumstances, both for the economy, for individuals, for the planet. A lot of politicians, again, and a lot of the parties, they come in and they say, oh, well, we'll fix it all. You won't have to put in any effort. We've got all the solutions. We're saying, no, the times ahead require all of us. The times ahead will be very difficult. Anyone who claims otherwise is straight out lying. This is going to be a tough ride, not just for us in Canada, but for the rest of the planet. The good news here, and there is good news, is that Canada and Canadians, when we pull together, we're able to do incredible things. Like, this country is a challenge to history, right? The fact that we have these two official languages, this very difficult relationship that we're hopefully improving now with our Indigenous brothers and sisters, people from all over the planet living on this country and maintaining the social peace that we have. Having been and worked abroad for so many years, I can tell you this is exceptional. This is not to be taken for granted. And this will require work. It's not about what we can expect from our government now. It's about what responsibilities we have, each of us, to uphold the values and the structures, the institutions that have allowed for us to have the decent, peaceful life that we've had so far. And very soon it's going to ask of all of us pretty significant sacrifices, one way or another, whether it's in our pockets or whether it's by other forms of activities that will be required to protect this country from what may come.
Yeah, that was very well spoken, very well said. The one thing, obviously, Donald Trump has been dominating on the campaign trail right now. That's the number one issue, according to Canadians. The number two issue is the economy, which is what we just talked about. And I'm glad that you brought up construction workers, because I'm a high-rise construction worker in the electrical trade. Yeah. And everybody is finding it hard to get by. Many of the people on my construction site, they dream of owning the apartments that they're building. And that's crazy to me. But I am glad that in this election, whether it's the Liberals, the Conservatives, the NDP, the Greens, I'm glad that everybody is finally on the same page when it comes to taking the burden off of people's paycheck. One of the things, as we talked, Noka and I talked about the previous podcast about how this election, I think, is going to be just a fire hose of information at voters, right?
Yeah.
Going all different directions, right? Normally, the scheduling of debates are not a hot topic at all, right? Media organizations, they just report on the dates and that's it, and we move on, right? However, Liberal leader Mark Carney, he recently backed out of the traditional TVA debate called the Face Fast. He said he wouldn't do it because Elizabeth May and the Green Party wasn't invited. Now, as a Quebecer, as a co-leader of the Green Party, now that the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois have said that they would be fine with the Green Party attending, and the Conservatives tongue-in-cheek said that they would pay the fee for the Liberals, do you want to be there for a second French debate, is I guess what I would say.
It's a very interesting question, and one I've responded a lot about this in recent days about in the Quebec media. Look, the TVA is charging $75,000 of each parties to attend. We were not invited because they set up specific criteria. One of them is to have an elected MP in Quebec by the time the writ drops, which was in our case. So as a result of that, Greens had not been invited. We made some approaches, of course, to TVA to see if there was a way for us to nonetheless participate, because we think that it's important to have a diversity of voices around the table. The response was negative. But that aside, and TVA is entitled as a media enterprise to set up the rules that they want when it comes to those debates. But one thing that we strongly object to as Greens is the monetarization of democracy. It is, media provides a public service to Canadians. All media in Canada receives some form of help from all Canadians through tax credits and other measures. Of course, CBC Radio-Canada, being the public broadcaster, receives the bulk of that. And that's a choice that we collectively made decades ago, and one that I stand by as a former journalist. I think it's crucial to have a strong national media that's independent from the pressures of specific individuals who own the private channels. I don't want to see Canada turn into the United States or other such media markets. But for us to see TVA as a private channel ask $75,000 to hold a debate, it's sort of like democracy is not an ATM, right? It's improper of them to ask for that money. And I don't care as to whether if the Conservatives can spend all of their treasury into that if they want. But for me, as a question of principle, this is not how national debates should be held. National debates should be held on the basis of having a party being, having members of parliament. The National Independent Commission for the Debates, which set up the rules for the CBC Radio-Canada debates that will be held later in this election, they have a set of three criteria, which I think are pretty good. And you need to hit two of those. One of them is to have at least 4% in the polling for 2 weeks after the start of the election. Another one is to have at least 90% of your candidates nominated throughout the country. So that's about 310 candidates in the context that we have 343 seats. And the third criteria is to have elected members of parliament at the time that the writ drops. Now, I believe that we as Greens are hitting all three criteria. We will be at the national debates. I think that's a pretty reasonable set of criteria. One where you only have to hit 2 out of 3. And that opens up the space for a variety of voices that do exist in Canadian society and need to be heard. And it shouldn't be about the party's ability to pay these outrageous fees. It should be up to just how relevant one is to the democratic debate.
Okay, well, thank you for answering that question. Really appreciate that. So with again, Donald Trump and the economy in the news, many Canadians view this election as a binary choice between liberals and conservatives. What is your message to those Canadians who feel that way?
Yeah. I mean, for as long as I've remembered growing up until now, we often get, as Canadians or anywhere in the world, really, people get swooned by someone new and fresh and interesting and great new ideas, and then they get tired, and then they just want to get rid of that person or that party. And then it's sort of this back and forth constantly. Whereas one party comes in, builds something, the other party comes in, destroys it, rebuilds something else, this constant dance. And the result of that is pretty clear. It's status quo. The result of that is that we're stagnating, sort of in the same place. And I want to say that benefits a certain amount of people, and it certainly doesn't benefit most of us. It doesn't benefit most of the people who, like you, Cody, are working, are building this country, right? The people that politicians were calling the hero, the day-to-day heroes during the pandemic, but then completely forgot about afterwards. That dance between the two main parties, it doesn't benefit them, and it doesn't benefit Canada. And it means that right now, as we face those threats from Trump, as we face, we're so used in Canada, I think, to the sort of this pattern that we hesitate to think outside of those boxes because it's a bit scary. But on the other hand, I'll say this, Canadians are not a people that is afraid. We're a brave people. We're a country of builders and adventurers and people who, it takes courage to live in this land. We were just discussing that, the late arrival of spring just now, right? Before the show started, and to live anywhere in this country is a challenge. And that's in our bones, that's in our history, that's in our, and for anyone who chooses this land and decides to make it home, like that's part of the conditions that one has to accept and adapt to. So for me, I find it very interesting, this sort of dichotomy between sort of our natural national culture of being, we're les coureurs des bois, we're the people who get out there, who don't shy in the face of a challenge. But on the other hand, when it comes to our political choices, we're very, oh well, but we're acting in a very careful manner. And I think that the times that we're in right now, they call for bold choices. Clearly, the country is not working as well as it should. The promise of this land is failing for many, many people. And now, we have a choice between a liberal party that's been, of course, there's a new leader now, and there's a lot of positive things and negative things to say about any of the leaders, and I don't want to get into that. But the Liberal Party as a party, has been in power since 2015 for the past 10 years. We've seen the results of that. A lot of people are not so happy about it. Will it change with a new leadership? That's a very big open question in my mind. When it comes to the Conservative Party, we have a somewhat newer party now, or a party that's taken a new direction, much more in a much more visible way, perhaps, than the Liberal has with its new leader. But that new leader, quote unquote new, is someone who also spent 20 years of his life in Parliament, right? And is very much a part of that establishment that has been making the decisions in this country, also as a minister under Harper for a long time. So if we want change, then maybe it's about time for us to vote for change, right? Like, and not settle for the one of the same two options that have brought us where we're at. I think the times, again, they call for a bit more of a vision as to where we're at and where we can go as a nation. And I'm not sure that these two parties are offering that vision. I think they're offering management solutions. They're offering small steps, small adjustments here and there. They're also very good at using the dog whistling of culture wars to make us angry against one another and turn us against one another. And why is that? Because it benefits them. At the end of the day, like this electoral system that we have, it doesn't incentivize collaboration. It incentivizes the political theater of division and anger and pitting lines and people against one another. We're trying to do politics in a different way. Other parties are as well. And I think that if Canadians want change, then they should vote accordingly. Not and they sh- and at a time when we're faced with those threats, I think that the last thing we want to do is show that we're afraid, because we have no reason to be afraid. At the end of the day, everyone that will stand on this stage at the debates, everyone that is standing for election in this critical time is a loyal, patriotic Canadian. Standing up in elections these days is a tough thing. And it's a thing that costs a lot, because you're constantly under attack by people you've never met. You've got everything on the internet. Like, it's a difficult terrain to be in politics right now. It's a difficult time to be in politics. So I make that choice of wanting to say, I mean, of course, I disagree with my opponents, right? And I think that, we have solutions to many of today's problems. And I'm sure that they think the same about their own solutions. And that's okay. That's part of the democratic debate. But when we start to act in such divisive ways, and when the system incentivizes that, then we enter into a bit more of a danger zone. And that's a zone that there are zones that I've seen in many other parts of the world before, and they never played out in a positive way. They always created more division and more anger, and the end result of that is not somewhere we want this country to go towards.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Thank you. Donald Trump, I'll ask you one last question about him. Donald Trump has announced tariffs and unannounced tariffs, announced tariffs and unannounced. We don't really know what's going on. Today he said we're recording this on Friday. He said he likes Carney. He's going to have a good relationship with Canada. We don't know what happens tomorrow.
And he didn't call him governor.
Yes,
Mark
he
Carney.
called him prime minister, which is a very, very new. We were talking, me and Cody, earlier, just before you came on. It's a very interesting success marker that now, just calling him what his position is something we would be happy about. If you become prime minister, which is what you're running to do, how would you handle Donald Trump?
Again, nobody is running to be prime minister. I'm in this unique position, as are my colleagues, to lead parties that could be elected to form government.
Right.
right? Nobody in this country is like anyone who says, I'm running to be prime minister, they're full of, expletives. I'm not going to use the word, but that's not how the system works. We need
But
to stop
you
thinking like
are,
Americans.
but you are one of those people who might end up in that seat in the next
But yes,
3 weeks.
that's correct. That's correct. And the chances are low, but the possibility is there.
Yeah.
Now, Donald Trump is someone who is, I mean, he's a man baby, right? He's a narcissist, and he is someone who is not to be trusted. He's also someone, more importantly, that is currently actively undermining US democracy and turning his citizens against one another and turning his state into something that we haven't seen in in this world, or in this part of the world, in the global West, since the end of the Cold War, something that verges on authoritarianism. And what I know of Canada and Canadians is that we don't deal with bullies and we don't surrender. So for me, the key objective of anyone who becomes prime minister after this election is not so much to repair the relationship with Donald Trump. It is not to assuage or somewhat, improve our ability to trade with that nation. It is to first and foremost strengthen the Canadian economy and defense urgently. Secondly, to create the kind of relationships with other like-minded nations that we have been neglecting over the past 20 years. We've been not Canadians, but previous governments, both Harper and Trudeau, have been so comfortable in this situation where we were basically under the protection of the US and doing what the US wanted us, that we failed to cultivate the strong alliances with Australia, New Zealand, Europe, Scandinavia, South America, Asia, that we should have strengthened. That's the number one job. The number one job is to create export capabilities and markets for Canadian goods, but it's also to ensure that we transition our economy away from the kind of colonial economy that we have been operating under throughout the history of our nation. We continue to ship raw products to foreign lands so that they can be transformed there, that value can be added to those products there, so that they can then be sold back to us. Yeah. That makes no sense, right? Alberta farmers are shipping their livestock south of the border so that they can be transformed there and sold back to us in steaks. We do the same with the logs. We do the same with the mining. We do the same with so much of our resources, because that's how our country was set up by our former colonial masters in the UK and France. We were first and foremost a place where we were coming to extract resources to help the capitals abroad. And we need to shift that mindset. We need to invest in Canadian manufacturing capacity. We need to turn this country into the energy superpower that it can be. And of course, talking as a green, I don't see our oil and gas sector as the source of energy for the future. But what I do know as a Quebecer is that we have many other resources that we can harness to create strong, good jobs for Canadians throughout the country. But it's all about creating the infrastructure for it, and also unleashing the entrepreneurial capabilities of Canadians. Like right now, because this country continues to operate like a colony, we also continue to have all of these monopolies, right? These big monopolies, and from the telecommunications to food to even housing, that continue to dictate our economic circumstances here. And frankly, conservative and liberal governments alike have been helping these monopolies accumulate more power over the past decades. So we want to break those, and we want to make sure that there's stronger competition within Canada, but also that Canadians, like there are so many, whenever I travel throughout the country, there are so many Canadians that have great ideas, that have a drive, that have the capacity to start up a business. But starting up a business as a person anywhere in this country is so difficult. There is so much more red tape for small players, and all next to no red tape for the big ones. You can come in and destroy an entire lake as a mining company with very little oversight. But don't sell X type of food in this shop in this place because you're violating bylaw X and federal regulation Y, right? That doesn't make any sense. We need to create strong jobs in our local economy, and that requires investments from the federal government. So we want to facilitate that, and we want to go and grab the money where it is. And again, the money is not in the hands of small and medium businesses. It's not in the hands of average Canadians. It's in the hands of all these people that our successive conservative and liberal governments have been helping accumulate and hoard dead money for decades. And now it's time to put this money to work for all of us and create that economy that will be resilient in the future. And that is not something that's going to happen by going to the White House and begging Trump to, take the tariffs down or whatever. No, I think we can help Canadian workers in the auto. Like, why the heck don't we have our own EV? I mean, we do produce some EVs, but like, we don't need Tesla. There are so many great Canadian entrepreneurs, engineers, auto mechanics. The knowledge is here. What's missing is the capital. And part of the reason the capital is missing is because the capital that the government actually currently has, it keeps investing and sending abroad, notably by funding the oil and gas industry in this country, which is owned at 70% by foreign investors. So we talk about the great Canadian oil and gas industry because it's headquartered in places like Calgary or Toronto. But the hard truth here is that when you look at who's are their shareholders, they're not Canadians. Most of them, 70% of them are foreigners. And I have nothing against foreigners. We need investment from abroad. We need to invest abroad. We need to diversify our economy, but we shouldn't be funneling billions of dollars of our own tax money into the hands and pockets of people abroad who, on top of that, don't pay enough taxes here. My 2 cents.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan. This was a wonderful conversation, and we really appreciate your time and your passion. You're very passionate, which is something that we need to see more of in Canadian politics. And we wish you the best of luck. We'll keep watching for the Green Party. We're going to keep watching for you. I really hope you win that seat, because we need strong, passionate voices in Parliament for sure. And I think you'd make a great addition to the Green Party's team that's already been elected, but also to the House itself, because like you said, we all need to work together regardless of political stripes. Thanks again. It was wonderful to have you here. Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you Cody for joining me again. He shows up to every episode, so I appreciate it. He has not run away yet. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope that we brought you a really insightful interview, and we're going to keep trying to do as much of this as we can, and we'll see you again probably in a few days.
Awesome. Thank you so much.